Female werewolf tribe. Female werewolf pack transformation. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I would like to thank you for exposing the werewolf tribes that sprang up in the Midwest in the 60s and the 70s, as I've never heard anyone else daring to broach this topic. I too was once a member of a female-dominated werewolf tribe, although I was not a leader, as the person whose testimonial I heard you read seems to have been. I was never a high-ranking member of my tribe, and I think I only stayed in it for the 12 years I did, as a sort of expression of the times. I dropped out of college to join in 1968, and I left when things got more violent than they had been before in 1980 to get married and to become a mom. In fact, I'm not personally aware of one single member of my tribe who is still even alive besides myself. Of course, that's a long time ago, so not all of them passed on due to accident or violence, but an awfully high percentage of them did. Besides our tribe, there were 8 others that I knew of, and an assumption that other werewolf packs had claimed the turf beyond our scope. We thought werewolves extended to both coasts, but who really knows? This was an era before cell phones and the internet. We only knew what we could see with our eyes and smell with our noses. This was the pre-digital age. I won't name real individuals, but I may use some nicknames. Like the nickname of our gang was the Alpha Bitch Crew, or ABC. Since bitch is not actually a curse word but just the word for a female dog, we sought to reclaim it as our own word. We called ourselves bitches, but woe be to any man who tried to use the same word. We were crazy, and we didn't just have double standards. We had triple and quadruple standards too. We were self-reliant, and we were magnificent for a long while. It got ugly by the end, and we should have quit while we were ahead, but it was a fine run. Unless you've lived absolutely free with a rampaging wolf pack, you can't truly understand what being alive even is. If I took all my years since leaving the pack, and combined the entirety of that time all together, it would still not represent as much life as 1 second of my time with the pack. For some reason, my husband and kids take it as an insult when I say that, but I can't lie. There is never going to be anything that compares with running as a member of that pack. I say all this, and yet I was not really very good at being a werewolf. We didn't think of it that way anyhow. We didn't even call it being a werewolf anyway. We were witches, and we were bitches. And one of the things that we did was to hold a monthly ceremony on the full moon, in which we literally changed into actual bitches and went on a feral rampage, destroying and eating anything that got in our way. At least, most of us did. Some of us only turned into these beast-like monstrous things that couldn't really be described as human or canine. On your channel, you celebrate this kind of werewolf, or upright walking canine. But in our tribe, if you were still standing on 2 legs after your transformation, then you weren't really very good at what you were doing. And that would be me. My first time at the Full Moon Festival was absolutely horrific. When the ceremony began at sunset, I watched as my sisters began to moan, skyward, swaying back and forth. They howled, and I joined them. But when they began to become wolves all around me, I only felt the heat rising. I was so hot that I felt as though I were melting, and yet I was not in any way progressing toward becoming a wolf as the others were. It's not like I didn't feel any effects from the incense and chanting, but what I felt was nausea and disorientation. I was not becoming anything but ill, and yet there wasn't much I could do about it, except sort of go with the flow and hope for the best. This was the 20th century, where a lot more was expected from people. and so I just made myself be brave. As much as I was capable of doing, at least. I was one of the only college girls in the group, and I took a lot of kidding for it. I had to prove myself over and over constantly in the early days, and so nobody was going to cut me any slack just because this was my first time growing fur and fangs and claws and so forth. The first thing that actually began to change for me was my nose, and it was an indescribably uncomfortable feeling. I am partially of Middle Eastern origin, and I was living in among blonde Norse people in the Midwest back then, feeling self-conscious about my proboscis already, when the tip of my nose tilted up and began pulling out away from my face. I was having buyer's remorse about the whole joining a shape-shifting witch cult thing. Nobody told me it would make my nose bigger. I know you've heard that the ears change first, and maybe that happens for some people, but there were a few of us who I think kept their human ears all the time. Generally, our facial features would begin to change first, and then the rest would follow suit. There were people who were naturals at it, and the beasts they ended up becoming were the most like real wolves of all of us, yet larger, and faster, and stronger. The less human you were by the end, the more it was generally viewed as a triumph. In our group, there were times when the monthly wolf hunt was largely ceremonial, and there were other years where we hunted with a serious intent due to lack of funding and food. It's hard to say what was an average day or even an average year, since we were fighting for resources with other werewolf packs, and also with human beings and other forest predators. In years of plenty, our leader would be decided through some sporting contest, but in the lean years, it would be decided by who could bring down a bear. And that was because bears were literally competing for the same food supply during those darker times. And if you don't think one single woman can bring down a bear, then you must never have met any werewolf women. Or, as we prefer to think of it, witches choosing to shapeshift into werewolves. By the way, if you don't believe this, you're not alone. My own mother says I made all this up. She says I was probably smoking crack for 12 years, but she's sure I was never a werewolf. For proof, she points out that I never transform anymore. Now that's true, but it isn't proof. I could barely transform into a two-legged upright canine type of werewolf when I was with the others, and when we were chanting and singing together. So what chance do I have of making the transformation so many years later, all by myself? My mother doesn't understand the ritual nature of this kind of transformation that we did. It wasn't lycanthropy. It wasn't an illness. It wasn't an affliction. It wasn't a curse. And it wasn't a spell. We were consciously deciding to shift the material nature of ourselves, and we were focused on becoming wolf-like. That's not the same thing as most other kinds of werewolfism or shapeshifting that I've heard or read about. I was telling you about my first time. I should get back to that. Everyone was changing faster than I was, and each person sort of had their own style to it as well. There were some other newbies there with me that first month, but none of them had any trouble at all picking it up. I was the only one who really didn't take to it naturally, and although some others seemed to experience discomfort during the cracking and the popping, I seemed to be the only one who really felt so bummed out about the whole thing. I mean, there were points where I was just all out bawling, but I couldn't exactly put my finger on why. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it was uncomfortable, but I was feeling a deep sense of sadness over something else entirely that I just can't name. As most of the pack transformed, some of them set off on a wild hunt. Some didn't, though, and I felt grateful for it. I not only was not changed into a four-legged animal, I kept sliding back and forth on parts of my transformation. It started to feel as if I were becoming human again. and then the process would begin anew, in a slightly different way than the last time. My fur would come out a different shade. The order of events during the change might alter. There were all sorts of minor differences each time, at least for me. But as I've said before and I'll say again, I wasn't really all that good at being a werewolf. All through the night I found myself changing, then changing again, and then again and again, each time into something more or less human than the last time. When our leaders came back with their kill, it fell upon those of us who still had hands to prepare the meal and cook it over a fire. There weren't many of us still standing on two legs, with the majority being the young or the old. I found it interesting that the traditionally female roles fell to the more human pack members. It's something I sorta still chuckle about till today. I really wasn't as helpful as I might normally have been that first time, as I continued to change back and forth all night until dawn. That meant my height would change. It meant the usefulness of my paws or hands would be going back and forth almost continually. I would also be more likely to follow orders when my hair and snout would recede, but less likely to even understand what was being said to me when the werewolf change reasserted itself randomly. There wasn't any kind of sympathy for what I was going through, though. Everyone was hungry, and not all of us were in a form that could digest raw meat. It needed to be cooked, and I had to help cook it. There was a lot of tough love going around that warm summer night. After dinner, we were ordered to build up the fire higher into something closer to a bonfire. We were in a clearing, but it was not so wide a clearing that I felt happy about making the fire so much larger. It seemed to me like our pack might have been starting to go a little too wild, but up on two legs as I was, nobody cared what I had to say. Humans are for following orders, I was told, even though I was by that point a dog-headed human to be certain. At dawn I became as much of a werewolf as I would ever become, which was an upright walking humanoid one, with a canine head, and a mane not unlike my human head of hair in those days. As I mentioned before, I never became a four-legged canine in all my 148 months with the pack. But that morning, when everyone else was back in their human forms, I was panicking about the fact that I had a long dog snout, and I had canine hind legs instead of my dancer's legs. Plus, I was extremely unhappy about all of this. I wasn't sure if I would ever become human again, and some of the others seemed to also be wondering if I was stuck in that halfway form forever. Our leaders pronounced that I'd probably be okay, which was at least a little bit of assurance. Probably. I was assigned my normal duties, which I found to be far more difficult to perform than usual. The others laughed at me and called me names, so I couldn't risk complaining, and I just did the best job I could under the circumstances. I cried myself to sleep that night, but by the next morning when I woke up, I was finally myself again. The end of my nose looked a little red, as though I had gotten plastered the night before, but other than that I seemed to be all right, at least until the next full moon celebration. One night many years afterward, when I was tucking my children into bed, I was telling them some stories of my days with the pack. My eldest daughter interrupted to ask me a question that some of you might be thinking right now. Mom, if it was such a wonderful, freeing experience to run with the wolf pack, then why does it sound like you had a lot of chores? Like you cried a lot? Like the others made fun of you? How can that be the greatest experience of all time? Well, I admit that my first time was pretty rough, but even someone like me can eventually get enough of the hang of being a full moon shape-shifting wolf person that you begin to understand the legendary appeal of it. Well, maybe understand isn't the correct word. Maybe I should say something more like appreciate. It has nothing to do with your mind or your thinking, so it isn't like deciding to do something. It's just the single greatest experience that a living being can have. And once you run with the pack, You'll then be telling me why this is. Even as a bipedal beast, I felt the blood rage. I felt the killing fury. I outraced a rabbit so that I could make it my next meal. I climbed a tree and plucked a bird from the sky as it attempted to fly away. I was able to, even on 2 legs, run faster than an old lady driving home from church on Sunday and give her the fright of her life. I stopped caring about right or wrong. No, I should say I stopped believing that there was a difference between the two. And that, my friends, is the crux of the matter in this case. It was the freeing sense that anything we did was justified by the fact that we had done it. There was no right or wrong for the ABC. There was only what we wanted and what we took. And that feeling is one that I can never taste again. I am human now, and to behave like that would be evil for a human to do. But nothing is evil to a wolf. There's nothing a wolf can do that would be either good or evil, it's just natural. For a human to behave like an animal, though, this would be wrong. A human knows better than to revel in violence and death. The wolf only revels, and it is an ecstasy beyond anything that a human can ever know. Because even the most psychotic human knows more about the difference between right and wrong than any of us werewolves could understand. What we knew is to me now just a faint wisp of a memory, because I can't completely feel the emotions that an animal feels any longer. Not an uncultured animal. And that was the kind that we transformed ourselves into. We were savage beasts, and so it isn't even something that any human listening to this could or should understand. Only evil can result of humans behaving like animals. If you remember nothing else I tell you, please remember that. But that doesn't mean I won't miss that time intensely for the rest of my days. I apologize if I'm making it seem attractive because it isn't a feasible or sustainable lifestyle. You know we all collapsed due to fighting between the wolf packs, right? I got out as soon as the violence was starting, but by the end of the 80s, my entire pack was disbanded, and most of them had already passed on. A number of people went missing, and I sort of hope they found new lives somewhere else, but I doubt it. This was not a way for people to live, but I don't regret us experimenting and finding that out. We thought that all of human evolution was somehow wrong, and that we were going to rewrite it and fix it to suit our political philosophy. We ended up going from hunting game to hunting other werewolf packs to hunting down our business enemies. We became the same as any other mob, as any other racket. We started out thinking we were going to be changing the world for the better, making it a place of greater possibilities for everyone. The only one of us who even survived that time was me, and I took on a traditional lifestyle after leaving the tribe. We changed nothing, and most of us passed on long before our time. But it doesn't matter. If you sent me back in time and told me that I had a chance to live my life again without the wolf pack, you know what I would do? I would go and join that wolf pack all over again. It was my fate to do it, and to learn that it's wrong for people to do what I did. It's my own personal contradiction. But that was a different time. I beg of you, young people of today, don't follow in the path of my generation. I lost all my friends and spiritual sisters far too young. And for what? To prove to ourselves and the world that our philosophy was flawed and couldn't hold water any better than a colander. You should be grateful there is nothing like that group of women around anymore in this day and age. The world is better off without the female werewolf tribe. About the coolest person that could ever be is today's executive producer, Chris C. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Chris C., for making this episode possible. Chris gets to see our secret uncensored episodes, of which we have a new one coming out Tuesday this week. And in fact, she gets all our perks because she is a top-tier member. Here to explain all the deets is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.